I'm here with Doug Brockman this afternoon, General Manager of Kline Van Specialty Rentals. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
Today we'd like to talk about compliance. There seems to be much conflicting information out there on what kinds of vehicles I can legally use for my business. And even when I know what vehicles I can use, what must be done to be compliant in the operation of those vehicles?
Yes, Sonia, it's a very tricky and extensive subject to discuss, but I'll try to give you some broad overview on what challenges are faced out there and some tips on getting it right.
Thanks. I know many business owners are stumped when it comes to this subject. Why is it so hard to find out what you can and cannot do?
Excellent questions. The problem is that though we have a national DOT and its National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, each state has its own DOT and its own sets of rules and regulations for vehicle compliance. I'd like to point out that there's been some recent legislation passed that will affect most businesses that operate the light-duty passenger vehicles that seat between 9 and 15 passengers. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, we'll call it FMCSA for short, has tightened up the language to include non-direct compensated operators of these types of vehicles in its own regulation. Until now, non-direct operators were not included in regulation because language was directed at those direct compensated industries, those being like limo companies, shuttle services, taxis, and bus companies. But now, any business who chooses to operate these types of vehicles will be affected. Every company that operates these 9 and 15 passenger vehicles will now be considered a motor vehicle carrier and subjected to minimum regulations like having a DOT number and marking their vehicles with that number. They will also have to maintain an accident register and will even have strict rules on texting and cell phone use. Then to make things worse, it's legal interpretation and timing of enforcement. Add that to the conflicting regulations with local jurisdictions and you can see where we have some issues. Though the new regulations adopted into Title 49 show an effective date of October 23rd of 2015, what that means really is that they cannot legally enforce it until such date. There's enforcement officers out there that are now telling people they're out of compliance. Vehicles that operate outside of immediate local jurisdictions can be pulled over and even hassled at state weigh stations and permit stations. The problem is that too many different law enforcement or authority figures enforcing compliance, they may know the national law, but may not know the latest updates and regulations or know law from other jurisdictions or states and which laws supersede each other. Two different people in the DMV office can have a different opinion on what's legal and what's not. I've seen it happen all too often.
I have too. Wow, that sounds scary and really overwhelming. It sounds almost like too much for the average small business owner to handle. Is there something Kline can do about it? Can Kline just handle this for us?
Glad you asked. Kline is looking into it, and as I mentioned, interpretation is a key component here. And it's unclear at this point how rental and leasing companies who rent these vehicles to the public will be treated. An individual can still rent or lease one of these vehicles for private use and be exempt from all these regulations. So we'll be asking questions to find out if a rental company's DOT and authority can be transferred to the renter. Much like in the case of a U-Haul, where you rent a truck and trailer and go across state lines, it all transfers in your rental contract. Once we're confident that we have a good understanding on how this will be interpreted, and in conjunction with all the new Ford Transit and Dodge Ram ProMaster van configurations that'll be out there starting next year, we'll be announcing some new solutions for customers.
Great. Sounds like that information couldn't come soon enough, Doug. So what about driver's license requirements? How do you know if your drivers need special licenses like CDL?
It's kind of the same thing, Sonia. Depending on the type of vehicle and its intended use, CDL may be required or it may not. Most state DOT websites will have some clear specifics on who will need a DOT and obvious uses. But be aware of the hidden uses, like picking up and dropping off kids at a day camp. In New York State, for example, a CDL and a bus-compliant vehicle is needed for more than 10 passengers. Completely different rules than if you're doing a one-time drop-off of kids in the same vehicle to a resident sleepover camp. No CDL or bus regulations apply. The rules can be that close sometimes.
So what do you do in these cases?
I wish I could say there was a single point resource that lists every compliance requirement that is needed for every state all in one place. But it's kind of the unicorn of the fleet regulation. It just doesn't exist. The best advice I can give is to spend some time and resources and research your jurisdictions where your fleet will operate at all levels: state, county, city, local authorities like your airport, municipality, port authorities, etc. Document everything, names, dates, titles, etc. Find out who you talk to. When a conclusion is reached on what regulation or compliance applies to you, summarize it and see if you can get your DOT office to sign off on it. You'll be amazed how handy that piece of paper will be when you come up against those situations and you need some proof on interpretation.
That sounds like excellent advice. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, if your business does use passenger vans, you know this is an especially challenging topic. The American Camping Association recently did an interview with me that was more in depth on passenger van uses. You can see our transcript of that interview on our website, www.klinevan.com.
Well, thank you, Doug. Good information, folks. While we don't give out legal advice on specific compliance, if you're unsure about compliance for your company and would like to talk with one of our fleet managers, Kline can be reached at 816-554-3344 or klinevan.com, and it would be worth your time to check on it. Thank you.